Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Dailies on Echo Television, where we keep you updated with the happenings on the paper. We're aware of, the fact that yesterday our resident doctors embarked on 7 days on the 7 days warning strike, concerning the fact that one of their member was being abducted, and it's almost getting to 8 months. They're yet to get a feedback. As well, we're seeing concerning the issue of the NLC president or chairman, rather, talking about Jero. He will be going to the police station today. We remember where Falana said that he had other things to do last week, and that was why he was unable to honor the invitation of the police. But hopefully today he will go over there to answer to the allegations on him concerning financial, financing terrorism, as well as other issues as well. So we would love to hear your own faith, your own contributions concerning any of the story. I am Sarah Elisha Dasho. And today I'll be doing the program alongside Prudence Brooker. Good morning, Prudence.
Good morning, Sarah.
All right, let us run through the papers, and I will start with the leadership newspaper. Alleged terrorism financing, where we have police to quiz Ajero today. Detail found on page 7 of the leadership newspaper. As well, talking about the Association of the Resident Doctor Strike, where we have consultant, nurses overwhelmed, patients stranded. More detail found in the paper. And trending on the paper, we have federal government bars candidate below 18 from taking NACO. APC women leader gives scholarship to 100 girls. So both trending and numbers can be found on page 2. And on the PIA, host communities demand increase of 3% funding allocation. Data found in the paper. End killing, kidnapping, banditry now. Khan Sultan urged Tinubu. The big story on the paper here, we have diabetic patients panic as drug price rise by 800%. With the rider, insulin rises to 26,000 naira from 3,000 naira. And we have Glumeta from 30, it's now 30,000 naira from 6,000. And here we are having one of the patients saying, I spend 200,000 naira monthly to manage my diabetes. Now we have an infographic here, where we're seeing 4.5 billion naira dollar, 4.5 billion dollar rather. Nigerians spend 4.5 billion dollars on diabetes treatment yearly, and then 11.2 million Nigerians are living with diabetes presently. Concerning herbal treatment, NNMPD offers hope for NAFDAC approved herbal treatment. Expert urge strict adherence to dietary rules, and then we're seeing here on excess sugar, coalition warns against consumption of sugar, sweetened beverages, which we're seeing that that is really very, very terrible. And then I don't know if you have something to say, Prudence, concerning it. We've been having this issue of people going through a lot, especially let's talk about our health sector in generally. So this is just looking at those who are going through our diabetic patients. And then we note the fact that, I mean, yesterday, while we're going through the paper, we're looking at the fact that I think NAFDAC was talking about how dangerous it is for those who consume, especially all of the sweetens that we have in our carbonated drinks in particular. And I know that we are all fans of taking that, but then here we see for those who are going through diabetes, we know what it means for them when they take in sugar. And then looking at the Nigerians living with diabetes presently, 11.2 out of over 200 million Nigerians, you could tell that this is really
high rate.
very terrible. So we hope the government does something. We've been laying emphasis on the fact that our health sector needs revamping, urgent revamping. Already here, just imagine if we have a diabetic patient presently and then we're having our resident doctors on strike.
You're having like two contrasting headlines
Of
on
course.
on the front page. You're finding that the consultants and the doctors are going on strike, and then you're finding that the price range of drugs of medication for diabetic patients is on the high, and it goes actually beyond the diabetic patients. Recently, I was talking with someone about medicine, and you would just hear that the prices of medication
In
all
general,
around, in
true.
general has gone high. It has spiked, and health now is quite expensive.
True.
To actually be healthy, it's very expensive. So it's encouraging for citizens of Nigeria, looking at the fact that um, the economy is not favorable, neither is the prices of medication favorable. So it's really encouraging, or it's something that we would encourage people that you should take your health seriously.
Seriously.
Any precaution that the medical sector tells us to take, let's go ahead and take it, so that we prevent ourselves from being in situations like this, where we are struggling between medication and actually living, because some
Health.
people are finding it quite hard to have food on their table. So it's really important, as much as we are saying that the government should do something about it, so that there's a drop in the prices of drugs, of medication. It is also required of us as citizens of Nigeria to take the small precautions that we can take to prevent ourselves from having this kind of ailments, and it will really go down a long way.
True, true, true. We hope that we all adhere to all of these warnings. Still on the leadership, the front page, we have 53 killed by flood in Northeast. You can find that on page 7. We've seen a number of what's happening in Adamawa, Jigawa, and many others concerning the flooding. And the rain is still ongoing, so we need to do all we need to do, especially the government. As well, coming from the NDLEA, they're saying 14.6% of Nigerians abuse drugs. Talking about substance abuse, you can read that on page 14. And on monkeypox, World Health Organization appeals for funding. And we have concerning Biafra, federal government engaging EU to extradite Simon Ekpa. This is a report coming from the defense headquarters, which you can read on page 7. And that's all on Leadership newspaper.
And on The Guardian, we have 48, that's actually the big story. 48%, sorry, take that again. $48 per barrel production cost drowns 60% of Nigerians' oil earnings. And then we have, you can actually see the details of that story, at page 6. And then we have 900 days on CDHR tasks Sanwo-Olu on justice for late Bemis, and that's you would find that on page 8. And then we have arrest Nigeria's CSOs unions urge to reject authoritarianism under Tinubu. News page 3. You would find that detailed there. Then you also have a story that says telephone service quality may drop as telecos consider load shedding, and that's going to be that's on the business page 6. Then we have marginalization, good governance, or additional 18 states. That's on page 4, news analysis. And then you have residents of Rivers community flee over fresh oil spill, page 29. And then you also have story on food insecurity, which is one vice that is really affecting Nigerians. Federal government banks to dry season farming as take that again, sorry. Federal government banks on dry season farming as flood devastates northeast, and it's really heartbreaking how flood is really ravaging our communities. Then we also have story at the downside of the paper. It says IMF hinges Nigeria's 3.1% economic growth outlook on stronger reforms. You find that on page 2. And that's it on the Guardian newspaper.
Right, let's take a look at New Telegraph newspaper, starting with the economy, where we have Nigerians becoming more optimistic. This is a report coming from the CBN. You can read detail of that on the front page and continue in the paper. A report coming from IMF, they say stronger reforms will sustain Nigeria's 3.1% growth outlook. Blue economy, other sustainable Chinese president to meet over trade deals. You can find that on page 4. and the NBA confirmed, where we have EFCC won National Assembly to enact whistleblowing law. Concerning Edo Guba election, INEC records highest PVC collection since 2015. And we hope for all those who are able to get their PVC, please do well to make sure you actually go and vote on the date that has been set for you, for those who will be voting in Edo State. And on oil theft, we have 72 illegal refineries, 204 incidents recorded in a week. This is coming from the NNPC Limited. The big story on the paper: can Sultan seek end to bloodshed abduction in Nigeria? Condemn farmers killing in Niger State, abduction of 150 people in Sokoto, threat over exponential rise in the level of insecurity. Urge Nigerians to be cautious, vigilant, report suspicious activities. More detail on page 3. A report here is saying about 31.8 million Nigerians suffering from acute food insecurity. And I hope that the governors of all states are doing what they need to do to make sure that the issue of farming, especially where we saw in the last paper concerning the Northeast looking into going into dry season farming, which is very, very important with the way flood has actually destroyed a number of farms. I think that will be a welcome idea. That 8 years after Afenifere leader repays student loan with over 3 million naira, data found on page 30. Federal government seek balanced report on Nigeria by international media. Still talking about the monkeypox, US donate 10,000 vaccine to Nigeria. You can read that on page 5. The issue of hardship, we won't consider coup by the army. You can do well to read that on page 2. The issue of Japa, 500 workers dump National Hospital for foreign jobs. And I think this is why we're having our doctors going on strike. And apart from the fact that one of their members was being abducted, we're seeing the fact that they don't have the equipment, their welfare is not well taken care of. And no wonder we're having more health workers dumping the National Hospital for foreign jobs. You can read that on page 7 as well as on page 28, where we have the writer here saying about 32 physicians in captivity as resident doctors demand government action. Downside of the paper here is a study that says noisy neighborhood increase heart attack risks. So I don't know what we can do about that, Prudence. We live in a very noisy area, starting from even our neighborhood, on the road, the way some horns and all of that. So I really do not know what we can do about that. But that's a study talking about, the risks of heart attack and all of that. Well, I hope that we can do something to protect ourselves. And there is just a deliberate action, I believe, to make sure that no matter the noise around, you have peace within. I think that's what it's important, because you definitely cannot stop people from making noise around you.
Exactly. And for some people, it's not something they can remedy because of the what they are receiving is not really reasonable. So so it's just, sometimes it's just out of their hands. But we do hope that we'll be able to take care of ourselves in the small corner that we find ourselves.
Sure.
Yes. And on the Nigerian Tribune, we have on fuel crisis, lepers in Lagos resort to drinking contaminated water, and health experts warn of public health crisis. That's the rider. You can find the details of the story on page 27. And Ogun border community seeks federal government intervention over violent attacks. Details can be found on page 10. And Labour Party moves to sanction Governor Oti. Okay, take that again. Labour Party moves to sanction Governor Oti, sets up disciplinary committee, and that will be found on page 3. The next story says Tinubu, Chinese president to meet in Beijing, page 4. Then you have a story on ICPC inaugurating anti-corruption unit in FIRS. That's really a nice one, good one. And the details will be found on page 26. And then you have deepening Nigeria BBC relations crucial from the information minister. and details can be found on page 26. And the bold story says, end killings, banditry, Khan Sultan urge federal government. Say recent bloodshed alarming. You can get the full story from page 3. Um, 45 years after ex-minister, take that again. 45 years after ex-rep member refunds federal government student loan of 1,200 naira with 3.1 million naira. You can find details of that story on page 10. Then Rivers Police launch manhunt for kidnappers of director. That will be found on page 30. You also have 13 arrested over attacks on Oyo Commissioner's convoy. Details can be found on page 5. Then no time yet for Orisanye's report implementation. This is by the federal government, and you can find the details of that story on page 4. Then on monkeypox, you also have states gearing up for emerging threats as US donates 10,000 doses of vaccine. And the writer says Nigeria, others to benefit from WHO's $87.4 million fund. And that story, you can find the details on page 20. And that's about it on the Nigerian Tribune.
Let's take a look at the Metrics newspaper then. GDP growth may not translate to improved living standard for Nigerians. This is coming from a Comero report. Yesterday we saw our GDP saying the fact that it has increased in the second quarter of the year. So here we're saying that that will not translate to the improved living standard of Nigerians. So you can read that on the front page and continue in the paper. Still the Metrics newspaper, Tinubu promises to MSMEs, not mere rhetorics, coming from Shetima. VP commissions ultra-modern MSME clinics, fashion, ICT hubs in Benue. Amid ongoing seizure of national asset, President Tinubu to the Chinese counterpart September. On flooding, NEMA report 49 deaths, 41,000 affected in northern Nigeria, data found in the paper. Big story, Labour Party crisis worsen. Abure set up disciplinary committee to deal with members who disobeyed him. Your tenure has ended, convening National Working Committee meeting illegal, fractional leader Okafor roles. INEC mischievous for saying tenure of national executive has expired, coming from Abure. All those stories can be found on page 2. NAFTA to fine and punish bakers using saccharin in bread. You can do well to read that on page 11. Therefore, if you are buying a bread, you need to check the ingredients. It seems it has been banned. You can do well to find more detail in the paper. We have Tagran condition deteriorating after 6 months of unjust detention. This is coming from Binet CEO. APC chief first auditor Mugalu resigned from the party. More detail found in the paper as well. For those who are interested in the entertainment industry, Mr. Johnson's husband celebrated 13 blissful years of marriage. Detail found on page 19. We have a picture story here, combating gender-based violence, where we can see the First Lady together yesterday. This happened at the National Population Fund in collaboration with her office in Abuja. And that's all the Metrics newspaper.
On the Daily Independent, Labour Party rejects Governor Oti's lone move to convene NEC. And the writer reads, tackles INEC for not inviting it to quarterly consultative meeting, and rises disciplinary committee to tackle undisciplined members. Then you have a story from NAFDAC denying report of advising Nigerians to avoid bread. Okay, that's quite interesting. Quite an interesting follow-up from the story you just read. And so but still, it is really relevant that we check what we're the bread we're eating, the ingredients of those breads, so that you don't go ahead and eat something that is unhealthy for you. The bold story says Nigeria moves to avoid international economic penalties, take that again, sorry, restrictive measures. I'll read that again. Nigeria moves to avoid international economic penalties and restrictive measures. The rider reads, vows to exit terrorist financing countries list by May 2025. And it also says the country has 9 months left to exit grey list deadline. On monkeypox, Lagos on high alert against importation of aggressive variant. Yeah, you can find that story on page 7. EFCC chairman urges the National Assembly to pass whistleblower protection law, also found on page 7. Nigerian military will continue to defend democracy. That's from CDS, and that will be found on page 6. Ex-APC National Auditor Mogalu quits party. You can also find that on page 6. Then IGP harps on citizens' participation in national security, seeks collaboration from stakeholders. You can find that story on page 7. You also have a story from Ekiti. 2 years after commissioning Ekiti 20 billion naira airport, yet to take off. Interesting. The writer says stakeholders worry over 90% airports are not self-sustaining, say they are constructed only for political reasons. We do hope that that will not be the case for Ekiti State. And you also have a story from LED. It says, you can't dissolve Benue local government area ESCO, Ganduje, led NWC once committee. You can find that story on page 29. You also have a story that says Tinubu to visit China over rail project and other MOU deals. So you can find that story on page 7. I think that's about it on the Daily Independent.
Right on Nigerian News Direct, IYD 2024, Sanwo-Olu disburses 10 million naira rather to aid young entrepreneurs. Sanwo-Olu disburses 10 million naira to aid young entrepreneurs. Data found on page 3. Reports still coming from the IMF says federal government must implement stronger reforms to record economic growth. Urges the federal government to tackle bottlenecks in governance and regulations. As Oyetola Sanwo-Olu investors, data found on page 4. Reps to pass legislation on electricity theft, and we have US aid donates 10,000 vaccine doses to Nigeria to tackle the mpox. Again, NCDMB custom tops in PEBEC efficiency transparency ranking, data found on page 7. Concerning October 1st, another nationwide protest imminent as organizers issue 17-point demand. We hope something will be done before then, because this is when we'll be celebrating and remembering our independence. So I hope the government have something up its sleeve to stop another protest from erupting. You can find out on page 2. We have the picture story, of course, where we can see the governor of Lagos State, as well as, I believe, all the investors that he's trying to woo into the state. You can do well to get the paper and read more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you.
Right, so the Daily Times, you have the bold story saying Kaduna residents flee to urban centers as abductions rise in hinterlands. And the IGP urges citizens collaboration. That's the rider. You can find the details of that story on page 2, and we do hope that the issue of security would be tackled in the nearest future, because it's really bedefiling in our society. It's really biting hard on the society. We do hope that this would be rectified. And NAFDAC clears misconception about the use of saccharin in bread production, page 5. And then you have the former reps member repays 3.1 million naira student loan to NEL fund after 39 years. Interesting. You have the details of that story on page 17. If that interests you, please do well to check that out. Then you also have a repeat story actually. President Tinubu scheduled to travel to China. You can find the details of that story on page 2. And on Edo Guba, INEC to conduct mock accreditation of voters September 10th. You find the details of that story on page 14. And then you also have a story that says police confirms arrest of 97 Shiites following killing of officers in Kaduna. Right, so you also have ICT contributes 19.78% to Nigeria's second quarter 2024 GDP. This is by NBS. You can find the details of that story if you are an economic lover and a business person. You can find the details of that story on page 14. All right. Oh, sorry, take that last from the NDLEA. 14.6% of Nigerians hooked on drugs. That is from NDLEA, yes. And you can find the details of that story in the papers, the Daily Times papers. Please do well to look into that if you find any interesting.
Right, let's take a look at the first newspaper. Hit them hard until they succumb. This is coming from the Nigerian Air Force chief on fight against terrorists, oil thieves. You can read detail of that in the paper. AMCON enlists international hunters for 5 trillion naira debts. US donate 10,000 germs vaccine to Nigeria to combat monkeypox. Governor Diri charges commissioners on teamwork unveil assured prosperity agenda for second term. Nigeria struggles with severe flooding, 49 dead, 41,344 displaced, and basically most of these happened in the northeast of the country, data found in the paper. #Embed Governance Movement drops 17-point ultimatum, where we have October showdown with federal government looms. Organizers demand release of detained protesters in Nnamdi Kanu, scrapping of 1999 constitution, minimum wage increase to 250,000 naira, among others. Now we're seeing there's a review. This was the initial money where we had NLC saying they should be paid to workers before the federal government slashed it, and then they stop at 70,000 naira. Now we're saying that the organizers of the protest are going back to say, you know what, you need to review the minimum wage and take it back to 250,000 naira. Scrap the 1999 constitution as well as other demands that are being listed. But just like we said, if they are targeting October 1st for this, I really do not see how this will be a good picture for us internationally to other countries that have been looking up. Of course, we know there are a number of things that need to be tackled within the country presently. But then there is a better way, I believe, that these things can be, approached. Yes. We know what the last protest did. A number of hoodlums took advantage of that. Properties worth billions of naira were being destroyed. Till date, we're having some of these protesters under detention, where we're seeing that the CSO have been calling civil societies, have tried their best to say, you know what, please release it. Because we also, according to reports, is having that even minors are part of those that have been detained. and you ask question, what was the minor doing on the street during that protest? Definitely, he or she was taking advantage of to cause chaos and trouble. So, with all of these things happening, this might just be them safe, but then eventually, we know the way things are. There's never smoke without a fire somewhere. So, we just hope that it doesn't happen eventually, because whether we like it or not, if we look at it critically, the protest has a way of setting the economy of the country a little bit backward.
Yes.
If we look at it, so I think there's a better way. I hope that the government will rise up and do something early
Prevent.
about it before it gets out of hand eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Really, something needs to be done before this escalates, because the Nigerian citizens are not satisfied with a lot of things, and also coupled with the fact that even with the minimum wage being at 70,000 naira, it's not promising, because inflation just keeps on. Things are just skyrocketing in the market, and Nigerians are really disturbed. They are, this is Nigerians crying out. It's not just organizers crying out. This is actually the voice of Nigerians crying out that hardship is really biting, and it will be helpful if the government would decide to do something urgently to prevent things from escalating, because it really doesn't look good on Nigerians that on a day that we're supposed to be celebrating our freedom and our liberation, we would be in chaos, because a lot of times that's what protests end up becoming in Nigeria, taking to consideration the just recently concluded protest. So let's just hope. We have our fingers crossed and hoping that the government will do something urgently before it escalates.
Surely. Well, let's round about the story still on the first news, where we have Khan Sultan to federal government and disheartening spite of killings, banditry in Nigeria. You can read detail in the paper. Federal government faces mounting debt as borrowing outpaces revenue growth. This is a report you can find in the paper. And we have the picture story, which has been on most of our paper, where we can see the body that has been put together to look into our debt and those who have been, getting the country. This is APCOM Media Panel in Lagos. This happened on Monday the 26th, so you can do well to get the paper and read more detail. But before we continue further with the paper review, we'd love to take a break at this moment, let you go through the stories and show you what you feel about the strike ongoing presently by resident doctors, as we're seeing the issue of monkeypox also taking the front role, as well as looking at the prices for drugs for diabetic patients going up. So quite a number of issues on the paper. We will love you to contribute to it. So when we come back from the break, we will continue the paper review. Please stay tuned with us.
The gospel of Jesus Christ is our Heavenly Father's plan for the happiness and salvation of His children. Equa Television International shares the gospel of Jesus Christ because the world must come to the realization of the power in the atonement of sin through the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ, sharing with the world the message of hope that can clean anyone from sin to enjoy the peace that is in Him. Equa Television International is live 24/7, preaching the message of salvation and truth to the world. Pray for Equa TV. Support Equa TV. Be part of Equa TV. Keep watching Equa Television International.
welcome back. It's still the dailies. We have been looking at quite a number of stories on the paper where we're saying that the president of the country is as well trying to have a memorandum of understanding with the Chinese to see what can be done concerning one or two things in Nigeria, as well as we're looking at other moves concerning the issue of patients with living with diabetes, the fact that drugs is very high, and what the government is doing about our pharmaceutical industry in the country, as well as other stories. So just like we said before we went on the break, we would love you to be part of the conversation by dropping your comment and your views on Facebook as well as on YouTube. I still have Prudence with me. Thank you so much, Prudence.
Thank you.
All right, let's continue the paper review, looking at the Punch newspaper.
The leading story in the Punch newspaper reads, Flight for Fancy, take that again, Flights of Fancy, governor slammed for wasting 160 billion naira on unviable airports. And you have Nasarawa, Yobe and others beg federal government to take over airports shunned by airlines. You can find that story on page 19. Upside the newspaper, you have Lagos Calabar Highway demolition. 100 landowners team up for fresh legal war. You can find the details of that story on page 2. On page 7, you would find the story Abure OT in coalition cause over Labour Party NWC Tana. And you would do well to check that out. You have external auditors to examine NNPC's 2.6 trillion naira subsidy claim. You can find the details of that story on page 20. You also have a story that says, with current hardship, electorates won't vote APC. That's a confident statement from PDP chieftain. You can find the details of that story on page 7. You have INEC rules out PVC collection by proxy, and I don't actually see any reason why you would collect your PVC by proxy. So that makes a whole lot of sense, but you can find the details of that story on page 14. You have a story that reads Amcom set to sell Ibadan Disco. You can find the details of that story on page 20, and you have IG, the Inspector General, vows to rescue 2,149 kidnapped victims. You find the story on page 10. Then Lagos conducts Red Line Rail test run today. You find the details of that story on page 6. And you also have picture stories on the Punch newspaper, and where you find children attending classes inside and outside a dilapidated building in Mocha, Yemen on Tuesday. And that's all on the Punch newspaper.
Right, on Daily News Hub newspaper, why Tinubu replaces DSS and IADGs. This is coming from the presidency. They are the source of the story. You can read that in the paper. Big story, hashtag in bad governance. Organizers issue federal government 17-point demand set for October protests. One detained protesters, Nnamdi Kanu release. Demand on freezing of bank accounts. We will recall that they said there were some accounts, about 83 of them, that were linked to the protesters and those who were organizers, rather. You can do well here. It's part of the demand that they are asking, as well as seeking scrapping of the 1999 Constitution and restructuring. Detail found in the paper. After Paris trip, Tinubu goes to China to meet Jinping, that is the president of China, scheduled to perfect the Memorandum of Understanding, and others meet 10 Chinese companies and CEOs. Fresh crisis hit Labour Party as Governor Oti calls neck knitting. We will defend democracy, Army assures Nigerians. 80% of Nigeria's workforce will be jobless without MSME, says Vice President Shettima. Apologize to Benin monarch. Within 7 days, group gives Obaseki ultimatum. Ex-rep repays 1,200 naira student loan with 3.1 million after 47 years. Now we're seeing disparity in our various papers. One of our papers is saying after 45 years, another one saying after 39 years, and we're having the Daily News Hub saying after 47 years. We hope the papers get their story right and correct, just so that you don't confuse people who are following up that story. You can read detail of that in the paper. Anambra government shut school over bullying. You can read which school was that and if your word is involved. Save us from incessant violence, killing, kidnapping by killer herdsmen. Owoyeke, two people cry out. Urges the federal government, international community to promptly intervene. Dismiss viral video, deny head of town Regency Council, DPO shading the Fulani settlers. And this is happening not just there but all over the country. People are under attack. We hope the government does something concerning insecurity. And the last story on the paper here, US donate 10,000 Mpox vaccine doses to Nigeria. And that's all in Daily News Hub newspaper.
On the Daily Sun, you have the major story reading Army Chiefs, Soldiers Can't Be Used to Serve Some Interest. You can find the details of that story on page 28. You also have story of Enugu at 33, Governor Mba, ESDA Lord funding father's sacrifice. You can find the details of that story on page 30. Then you could also find this story on page 24. Federal government names 23 managers for investment funds, and the writer says committee to design strategies for investment of $10 billion global funds. On insecurity, federal government seeks Japan others help, and you have the writer reading Sultan Khan raises concern over worsening situation. You can find those stories on page 4 and 6. Man ICCI folds NBS 3.19% second quarter GDP growth report. The writer says impact unfelt by Nigerians, and IMF projects 5% economic growth. You have that story on page 25. Please do well to read that. And the Lagos Monarch sacks Markets Committee over high cost of foodstuffs. You can find that story on page 30. You can also have Tinubu aims to strengthen Nigeria-China ties during September visit. That's from the presidency, and the writer of that story says to meet Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, sign MOUs. That story can be found on page 6. You have Edo, INEC to conduct mock accreditation of voters to test run beavers, and IREV on September 10th. You can find the details of that story on page 30. And downside the newspaper, you have First Lady, Governor's wives sign agreement to combat gender-based violence. You can find the details of that story on page 29. You can also there's also a picture story of the Emir of Lafia and Oba of Onitsha and the Olu of Warri and other people after a panel discussion at the ongoing NBA conference in Lagos yesterday. And that's it on the Daily Sun newspaper.
The Nation newspaper, Edo 2024, INEC to conduct mock accreditation. APC calls on security men to prevent rigging. 65 billion naira will solve Edo water crisis, says Ogudalo. Beni Group urges electorate to vote wisely on September 12th. Data found on page 29. Nigeria get 10,000 monkeypox vaccine dose. World Health Organization need $87.5 million. What Tinubu's China trip means for Nigeria by the presidency. what Tinubu's China trip means for Nigeria by the presidency. CBN to issue 2.2 billion naira treasury bill in the fourth quarter of the year. Khan Sultan decry resurgency of kidnappings and killings. The big story: CDS, that is the Chief of Defense Staff, COAS, military won't give in to anti-democratic call. Civil rule is best for Nigeria, says the European Union. Army goes into massive food production. Now we have certain statement coming from both, well, from three of them. The Chief of Defense Staff is saying the military is ready to always defend democracy, to ensure the safety of critical government assets and an increase in oil production. As well, we have the COAS saying, my simple response to the call: the Nigerian army will not allow itself to be used to undemocratically sell some interest to power. European Union is saying democratic governance in Nigeria remains the key inspiration of Nigeria and remains the best way to uplift a stronger and a better Nigeria. All this can be found in the paper and you can continue reading that. Government joining forces with foreign nations to recover stolen wealth. Lawyer seeks speeding up of justice system. Misinformation erodes trust between the government, the people, says the Minister of Information. You can find that in the paper. Downside of the paper: Rivers Council poll Fubara loyalists shop for alternative platform to contest. You can read detail of that on page 28, and that's all on the Nation newspaper.
On this day newspaper, you have Tinubu to visit China in September to seal deals with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And the writer reads, also to lead African presentation at FOCAC Summit. You can find that on page, or rather you can continue reading that on page 9. You have FAO, 31.8 million Nigerians grappling with food insecurity. And you can find that story on page 5. And that is a connecting story also because a lot of cases of flood is ravaging through the country. So the issue of insecurity is really relevant at this time. We have Soludo saying, I haven't borrowed a dime as governor of Anambra. You can find what he says on page 6. You have Labaja raises alarm over new security challenges in Nigeria, and the CDS chief defense saying military working tirelessly to ensure increase in oil production to boost economy. And then you have the air chief orders commanders to heighten clampdown on adversaries. You continue the story on page 9. The major story says IMF, Nigeria must sustain economic reforms to turn the corner. And the writer says, sustaining reforms will deliver between 5 to 8% growth annually, and Sanwo-Olu Oyetola woo investors. You can find that story on page 9. Downside the paper, you have a story on Labour Party crisis. OT warns Abure-led executive sacked. Sorry, take that again. OT wants Abure-led executive sacked. Seek neck meeting for August end. You have that story on page 28. Then you have a picture story that says, during Idris's working visit to BBC in London, and that's the news editor of Focus on Africa and a few others at that meeting. And that's about it on this day newspaper.
On Vanguard newspaper, which we will use to end the show, where we have multiplicity of charges, orders hindering export from Nigeria. NSC and stakeholders are saying that. Detail found on page 19. Hashtag Embed Governance. Federal government gets 17-point ultimatum on insecurity. End the bloodshed, Khan Sultan urged federal government. On flooding, death toll rises to 170, injured 2,000, displaced 205,000 people. Data found on page 10. The big story: agony in the southeast as kidnappers lay siege to communities. The right of Florida story here, tales of horror from Lokpata area. We have exit also of Konauko, Sambisa of the southeast. Gun battles rage almost daily in Okiwe. Oil bulk triggers insecurity in Okuta area. Gunmen launch attack from forest in Osu, Okuta, Obu, Omama. And then we have horror tales for kidnappers. Den has ignited fear in citizens. And then here we are having residents saying our experiences. We are tackling kidnapping, says the state governors and others. So not only are we having the issue of the IPOP there, we are having the issue of kidnappers again taking over some communities there. We hope the governors will put heads together and do something as well concerning that. Army to review agricultural policy over food security. This is coming from the chief of the army staff. Details found on page 9. Labour Party National Working Committee reject Governor Otis' move to convey elective NEC. We have a column on page 22 coming from Efe Babalola, and on sport we have controversy, Grace Lapadia's appointment. You can find that in the paper. And that's all on Vanguard newspaper, as well as how far we can go on the program this morning. Thank you, Prudence, for doing this.
Thank you so much, Bobby.
As well, thank you to our viewers, our supporters, and to the entire production crew. Until we come your way again tomorrow, do have a wonderful day ahead.